On that, but we begin today with reports the president ignored the advice of his own lawyers in an attempt to figure out what Bob Mueller asked some of his closest aides. At the same time, Mueller has been digging into alleged attempts to set up secret back channels between the Trump administration and Vladimir Putin. I've got a great team to help me break it all down, but before we go to them, let me explain exactly what we're talking about. The big story this morning comes from the New York Times. It has detailed accounts of interactions between the president and two of his closest aides, White House counsel Don McGahn and former Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, in which Trump asked about their conversations with Robert Mueller's investigators. Go back to late January when the Times published this article saying McGahn had threatened to quit after Trump ordered him to fire Mueller. It's the kind of thing that goes to the heart of whether the president may have tried to obstruct justice. Now, according to the Times, Trump was upset about the article and ordered McGahn to publicly deny the story. In fact, it says Trump even suggested McGahn would be fired if he didn't comply. McGahn, however, refused. When they met face-to-face in the Oval Office, Trump reportedly told McGahn he never ordered him to fire the special counsel, but McGahn told him that simply wasn't true. He insisted the president had told him to call Rosenstein and have Mueller dismissed, something that McGahn obviously didn't do. The president reportedly said he remembered the conversation differently. Now, as for Reince Priebus, that conversation happened in December, 2 months after the former chief of staff had met with Mueller's team. According to the Times, and I'm quoting here, Mr. Trump asked Priebus how his interview had gone with the special counsel's investigators and whether they had been nice. That's according to two people familiar with the discussion. Mr. Priebus replied that the investigators were courteous and professional. He shared no specifics and did not say what he had told investigators. Neither the president's lawyers or spokesman for the special counsel would comment. Why do these interactions matter? Because while it's not illegal for the subject of an investigation to learn what information witnesses have shared, it's usually done through lawyers. And one reason for that is that these kinds of conversations can make it seem like those involved are trying to coordinate their stories. And while all this is going on, we're learning about another part of Mueller's investigation, one that speaks directly to potential collusion between Trump's team and the Russian government. The Washington Post says Mueller is focused on a meeting in the Seychelles, islands off the coast of Africa, just before Trump's inauguration. That's where a Russian official met with Erik Prince, an unofficial advisor to Trump, in a meeting arranged and attended by a businessman named George Nader. Why does that matter? According to the Post, quote, Mueller is broadly examining apparent efforts by the Trump transition team to create a back channel for secret talks between the new administration and the Kremlin. Investigators now suspect that the Seychelles meeting may have been one of the first efforts to establish such a line of communications. That's despite the fact that Erik Prince told MSNBC it was no big deal. Here's how he described the meeting.
I was on a business meeting back in January in the Seychelles. I'd gone to see some guys from the Middle East that I've done some business with before, and they said, there's this Russian guy we've done some business with in the past, and you should meet him. So I met him in a bar, chatted for 20 or 30 minutes, and that was that.
What was the reason to meet him?
The Emirati guy said it's someone they'd done business with before, and it'd be an interesting guy for you to know because we were both involved in the commodities and energy space.
I want to bring in my panel. Robert Costa is a national political reporter for the Washington Post, also moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Midwin Charles is an attorney with Midwin Charles and Associates. Stanley Pottinger, a former assistant attorney general. We should mention his son is a member of the Trump administration. Julia Ainsley is NBC's national security and justice reporter. So, Robert, let me start the conversation with that talk between President Trump and Don McGahn. McGahn is saying Trump ordered him to fire Mueller, then ordered him to lie and say that never happened. Which aspect of that is a bigger deal?
They're both big deals. The president has been fighting this political war against the Russia investigation for about a year. But Don McGahn, the White House counsel, knows that as an attorney, as someone who is supposed to uphold the law, that he cannot go out there and lie about interactions. And so that while the president may be trying to present his version of events in his way, that Don McGahn cannot do that in the same way. And so we're seeing these tensions inside of the West Wing as all of this pressure mounts.
And Julia, we mentioned that Trump talking to Mueller's witnesses is not illegal, but his lawyers had obviously warned him against it, right?
Right. I mean, as you laid out, Chris, it's really common for defense attorneys who are representing witnesses in the same case to all be talking to each other, trying to figure out what was said. But the reason they do that is because they have law degrees and they need to make sure that there isn't a crossing of the line that would come into a coordination of their stories. And so in this case, when Trump is sort of especially badgering people like he did in the McGahn interaction that they've laid out in their story at the Times, it seems like he's actually trying to coordinate or to badger people to say something different than he would like them, than they did say before Mueller's team. So this is really a place where he's going beyond what his lawyers have, of course, told him not to do, to not discuss this business at the White House. And it shows that it's probably because he has a lot of inner turmoil and panic about what is being said about him. This is an ego thing, and it's also a very much a big worry, I think, that he has, especially about this obstruction case.
Yeah, it's hard to look at this almost in any other way, Midwin, but that he's, it supports the reporting that he's rattled, to say the least, by all of this that's going on. And then so he goes to people who have been talked to by Robert Mueller's investigators and says, hey, what did you say to them? Trying to figure out exactly where all of this is going. But how do you think Bob Mueller and his team look at those conversations, even if they aren't illegal?
Well, I think they look at them and they start to add to other aspects and other actions that Trump has done that indicate that this is someone who has something to hide. This is someone who doesn't want people to speak to Robert Mueller. And this is additional evidence towards a case of obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice is a very broad term in the sense where it can mean the fact that you want to end an investigation, or it can mean the fact that you want to influence what happens in an investigation. So it's a pretty broad thing. But I have to tell you, one of the reasons why this is the most disturbing is because we do not want to go into an area of witness tampering. Our justice system exists in a way, and of course we can all agree that it is flawed in many ways, but we have to, as a public, have full faith and credit in the decisions that are made in our justice system. One way that we ensure that is we ensure that when witnesses come to testify, that they do so openly and honestly, and without any coercion, without any influence. So in order for us to have integrity in our system, that has to be one of the most critical things. And the fact that the President of the United States is going around and speaking to witnesses and hoping to sort of influence or nudge or find out what they say and make them uncomfortable is disturbing, to say the least. There's an appearance of impropriety here, which I think we can all agree in many cases the appearance of impropriety is sometimes far worse than the actual impropriety itself.
Well, I mean, there's also sort of this power thing, right? And at least legally, does it matter who and how much of a position of power you're in if you're trying to get information from a witness? And it's hard to argue that anybody's in a higher position of power than the President of the United States, the leader of the free world.
Yeah, one of the problems with this is that you can't tell what part of it is Donald Trump in his personality and what part of it is actually a studied effort to try to influence an investigation. By that I mean this. As Bob pointed out, he can find out everything that was asked of any of the people he talked to, McGahn, Reince Priebus, anyone, by having their lawyers talk to his lawyer. That's permissible. So you don't gain anything in terms of substance by asking yourself as the president, hey, Reince, what did they say? Were they nice? You gain nothing. So what you have to ask, therefore, is he really rattled, or is he really worried, or is he really trying to influence it? Or is this Donald Trump being Donald Trump, which is, hey, I'm president, I'm going to ask you directly. So part of it is trying to figure out his personality versus the style he uses versus what could be done.
Midwin, I'm not sure you're so sure about that.
Well, I understand the distinction that he's making, but whether it's a question of is this Donald Trump or is he sort of purposefully trying to influence the investigation, it really, I'm not sure that it matters, because Donald Trump, as we know him to be, is someone who is right now skirting along the lines of the law. So I don't know whether his personality is really the issue here. The fact is, he has a personality that likes to skirt the rules and the laws, and that's problematic for us as a country.
And then you have the Seychelles. It's one thing to have a meeting, Julia. It's another thing to say this was an attempt to set up a back-channel communication. Is that a crime? Why would that matter?
Yeah, I'm remembering Chris, us having this debate about a year ago when a lot of this news about a back channel came out, and John Kelly, who was then DHS Secretary, came out and said, look, diplomacy happens through back channels all the time. But why this would present something different is because it would be January 2017, right as this new administration is coming in. And if there was anything that they owed this government, the fact that they're setting up a back channel obviously looks incredibly nefarious. They're doing it in a different country. They're doing this through someone like George Nader, who we know Robert Mueller has already spoken to several times. He spoke to the grand jury last week. There are a lot of reasons why Mueller would be interested in this particular back channel, but I don't think we'll be surprised if we hear more talking points like we heard from John Kelly last year from this administration saying, look, it's okay for us to have these communications. We go through different people, different officials all around the world. You can't, diplomacy doesn't always happen when it's the heads of state shaking hands in front of cameras, and that's understood. But there's a lot about this particular meeting, where it took place, the timing, and the players involved that's obviously caught Robert Mueller's attention.
And hanging over all this, Robert, is Stormy Daniels, who has been hinting she's going to publicly share her account of her intimate relationship that she says she had with the president. And I don't, you know, obviously the Access Hollywood tape didn't have a major impact. He was still elected president of the United States. We're in a very different time now, I think, with the Me Too movement. Where do things stand with this, and how do you see this fitting into the big picture of this administration?
It's hard to predict the big picture. We are in a different moment than perhaps we were in the 2016 presidential campaign. And all people, all women who've had experiences of any sort in the past deserve to have their voices heard. And so she may make her voice heard in the coming weeks or months. How that plays into the midterm elections or the president's 2020 reelection chances remains to be seen.
Well,
because
it also depends what comes out, right? I mean, are there pictures?
Exactly.
Are there, you know, are there communications? I mean, yeah.
We're going to have to see, but she is someone who has claimed, as a reporter, I'm less interested in the relationship itself and the details of that, and more interested in this payment. How was the payment made? Who knew about the payment, and why did it unfold in the way it did?
And Sarah Huckabee Sanders, not surprisingly, did talk about this yesterday. Here's what she said.
The president has denied the allegations against him. And again, this case has already been won in arbitration. Anything beyond that, I would refer you to outside counsel.
Is this, Midwin, a case where follow the money, where that $130,000 came from, why it was paid? Could that be significant?
Absolutely, it's significant. You know, I was here about a week or two ago talking about this, and I had said that, you know, perhaps there was no illegality here. But at the end of the day, I'm going to have to retract that and say that the jury is still out. We do not have a lot of answers on this, on why the payment was made. The timing of it is incredibly suspicious. And whether or not this violates federal election laws, I think is highly questionable.
Well, can a lawyer even pay on behalf of a client? He says he did it himself. Is it okay for him to just pay $130,000 to somebody like Stormy Daniels?
Well, okay, meaning what okay?
I mean, is it legal? Is it legal?
Is it legal? No, yes, someone can be an agent for, I can be an agent for you, and I can be your lawyer.
But he'd have to be an agent for somebody. He says he paid it out of his own pocket.
Exactly.
Well, exactly, but if he was paying it for himself, why did he pay it for himself without doing it on behalf of someone else? He himself was not alleged to have had an affair with anybody, as far as I know. So that would be the first question is, are you really doing it for yourself, or are you doing it for someone else? And they'll get to the bottom of that.
All right. Well, thank you to my panel. And next, this firestorm over the Trump tariffs and why a